now we have the possibility to have one or two questions from the audience. And when you speak, please tell your name and organization you represent too. Do we have a microphone? Yeah? So please use the microphone as well. So who would like to start? Yeah, here in front.
Is this on? Yes. Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Eda Fernandez from the Ministry of the Environment and Natural Resources in Mexico. I would like to ask Unilever, what about working with Latin America and the Caribbean? Because you show us the spectrum in Asia and Africa, Green Asia, but what about Latin America and the Caribbean? We also are strong producers, and we can participate, benefit, and give alternatives for sustainable production and consumption. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I only mentioned Grow Africa and Grow Asia because these are existing initiatives under the World Economic Forum. There are plans, by the way, to create a Grow Latin America program as well. Unilever has many operations in Latin America. Unilever Mexico is very active in working with Mexican farmers, and we have quite a number of operations in Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, Paraguay, etc., etc. So I didn't mean to exclude Latin America from the program. We do sustainable sourcing, and we implement our sustainable living plan in Latin America just like everywhere else.
And next. There.
Good morning. I'm Hans van Gossem, Arcadis. I have a question for the European Commission. Could you please comment on what's happening with the No Net Loss initiative on biodiversity? Thank you.
Yes, we are preparing it, and we intend to come up with this initiative hopefully next year, but there is no yet a final decision that it will be next year. And we already know what kind of issues we want to address there. And it's basically, again, scaling up, because we know that we have systems in place to make sure that we have a no net loss when it comes to protected areas, Natura 2000 sites. But when it comes to moving in the wider biodiversity, we do not have these instruments. Now, it is not about creating additional legislation necessarily, but it's really about demonstrating what is already happening, because you have a lot of no-net loss initiatives in the EU, putting that forward and demonstrating what are best practices, and making sure that also in the wider biodiversity we make sure that bits by bits we are actually losing more and more biodiversity where we have some few safe havens in our Natura 2000 sites. So that's the objective, and we are working on presenting something next year, hopefully.
We still have a few minutes, so more questions? Yeah, Amy?
Thank you very much. Very interesting remarks. Amy Frankel again from the CBD Secretariat. My question is actually to the two case studies that were presented, and maybe also to Jason, which is this issue of, several of you touched on the need for governments to take action, and I made a comment in my remarks from the climate world where there's been a lot of discussion about leveling the playing field and enabling conditions. So I wondered if you might just give a few examples of where governments can help to create the right signals in order for forward-looking businesses such as yours to be able to scale up their actions.
Maybe the viewpoint of UPM is that we have been very much relying on a voluntary action. So any regulation, we see that we are creating really a competitive advantage for ourselves by taking voluntary action in terms of, let's say, sustainable wood sourcing. And therefore, maybe I leave it to my colleague here to discuss the cooperation with the government.
I think the point is very clear, specifically around the topic of eliminate deforestation. If you look at what has happened in Brazil, and in particular in Mato Grosso, where the deforestation rate is now less than between 5 and 10% of what the 10-year average has been, under the leadership of successive governors of Mato Grosso, and with a lot of collaboration with civil society organizations. That is a good example of how national or regional regulations can effectively lead to changes in behavior. There are, of course, issues around the implementation of the new forestry code, the environmental registry, etc., but the change is there. At the same time, the productivity of Mato Grosso per hectare has continued to go up, has continued to grow. So you have better protection of forest on the one hand, and you have increased ag productivity on the other hand. And that is the kind of collaboration that I think is needed. Business to business, you cannot eliminate deforestation. You can eliminate it from your own supply chains, but that simply means that your suppliers take the voluntary action that UPM has taken, and they are a supplier of packaging to Unilever. But there is still a large part of, say, the palm oil production sector that does not supply to the European market or the North American market, but supplies to markets that are not interested in sustainability and are not interested in deforestation. And so you create a two-tier market, one that plays to the sustainability demands of the future and one that doesn't, unless regulation steps in. Jason, you want to? Yeah, just. You're a bit far from the mic. Oh, we can move it.
I think what Jan Kees has talked about is important in terms of land use planning and zoning and thinking about which areas are to be used. But there's another, I think, sleeper issue that needs to be identified here that governments need to do that's affecting particularly companies that are trying to do the right thing and trying to buy products that are produced legally, etc. We've started doing research on across the board on minerals and wildlife trade and fish, both aquaculture and wild-caught, livestock, agriculture. And what we found in our work is that between 5 and 50% of all globally traded commodities are not produced legally in the country of origin, whatever the laws in that country are. And this has been exacerbated by the WTO, which doesn't allow you to differentiate based on how a product is produced. So we have a crack here that's very large. We don't know if it's increasing or decreasing because we don't know what the baseline was. We just know that it is big. And it's not developing countries only. It's also Netherlands, the US, because part of it's about resource rights and whether you have access to the resource that you're selling legally, whether a concession or fishing rights or whatever. Part of it is around social issues, from slave labor and child labor all the way to undocumented workers, etc. This is permeating supply chains, fraud, corruption, dilution, and other laws. If you pick up Jan Kees's example of deforestation in Brazil, that was not legal, most of the deforestation. And that affected most of the soy exports and the beef exports from Brazil, making it illegal. Does that make the dairy products and the pork and poultry in Europe that's produced with soy from Brazil illegal? I don't know. But it's something we need to think about. And we can't work on all of these things. So we've got to figure out where to start and focus on them and begin to eliminate them from supply chains. But here's the way it connects back to biodiversity. When I showed that performance graph, the poor performers tend to be more illegal. It's not an accident. They're cutting corners. They're trying to survive. They're doing all kinds of things. So these connections to biodiversity law are connected. And we've got to figure out how in a global trade is a incredible opportunity. It's a way to manage a planet, and comparative advantage is real. We can produce some things better in some places than others. So that's very important, but not if we're cutting corners. And I'm not even saying what the laws should be in a country. I'm just saying what they are. That's what the litmus test is here.
Maybe one thing to add there, if you look at the performance curve that Jason showed, eliminating worst behavior, whatever that worst behavior is in whatever market, cannot be done through sustainable procurement policies by companies. What happens when I talk with my procurement colleagues is they'll simply say, this guy is really, really bad. We're going to delist him. And instead we source from a company that does behave ethically, that does abide by the law, etc., etc. But that other operator is still there. The only thing that can eliminate worst behavior from the market is regulation.
The one, it's so the work that we've done on this around seafood and timber products suggests that the impact of illegal production and illegal trade globally has about a 15% damper on legal sales. And so this is a huge issue for companies that are trying to be legal, is that the illegal performers can come in below their cost and undermine them and reduce their profit margins. So this is a place where everybody should be able to join together to try to put this, it's in everybody's advantage to address this issue.
We have more or less used the time we had this morning, but the last short comment to Stefan.
Thank you. I think this is really an important question. Our experience is that regulation is absolutely necessary and key, and the reason why in Europe we have no loss of forest area, but it's growing and the stock is growing, is because we have in all member states very strict legislation that forbids deforestation unless you replant somewhere else, or that makes it having sustainable forest management mandatory in forest legislation. And I think that is absolutely key. But I also don't think that regulation is bad for business, as it's often perceived. I mean, we had the financial crisis, and one of the few sectors that have not suffered, that still were growing during the financial sectors, was the environment business sector, because it showed that it's very resilient towards these kind of outside areas. And I think it does create a level playing field. It is a promoter for innovation, and it helps really developing the solutions that we need in order to feed the world with one planet, etc. So I think it's not sufficient. It will not solve the issue only having regulation. You need also voluntary, you need all the other commitments that we heard today, but it underpins it, and it's a major, I think, prerequisite for achieving any of our biodiversity objectives, in my view.
Thank you. I think we had a very good start in the discussions. Let's continue with that during the forum. Let's give a big applause to all the speakers once again.